Welcome to Every Step Podcast. I'm Krystyna Weston.
And I'm Judith Beck.
Every Step is the podcast where career and life meet.
With a new guest every episode, we explore the gutsy issues affecting everyone in the workplace. Today we welcome Elizabeth Best, who is the host of the podcast of Ghost of Boyfriends Past, which is a great podcast. I've listened to it. I love it. And you know what, Elizabeth, we have been waiting for this episode because there's so much content. And because of that, in this particular episode, we're going to do a part 1 and part 2. In part 1, we're going to talk about our experiences and what's happened and try to give some advice on what we would do. And then in part 2, we're going to do a very quick question and answer in real life scenarios. So hopefully that will help people go, yeah, that happened to me and this is what they did. So maybe that's not a bad idea. And again, it's all about what we would do. And everybody's different. Every situation's different. So I think that we should just kick it off with Elizabeth. I know this has happened to you in the past where you've met someone at work. Mm-hmm. Just tell us a little bit about what happened.
Well, look, the first time I met this person at work, we were both in relationships with other people for about 5 years. So we developed a really good, solid friendship. And I think that's probably why I was a little bit more trusting of the relationship than I would have been had we, had this instant chemical, physical attraction thing. It was. And so when my ex cheated on me, this colleague was there for me, and they will be like, well, why don't you find a relationship of someone that will appreciate you properly? And the inference was like me. But he was still in a relationship at that time, so we didn't let that go any further until we were both single. But when it did go further, it was so fast. It was so we'll get married at some point and we'll do this and we'll do that. It was very, very love bomby. And then we went away. We finally told people at work probably about 3 months into the relationship. And, the boss was okay with it as long as, we acknowledged that it was, a thing. We didn't have
to and
yeah. And then we went away on our first mini break. And during that mini break, we had a fight. I don't even remember what it was about, to be honest with you. And in the morning, he said, I don't want to do this. And I said, oh, well, that's fine. I don't want to do this either. Let's not fight. And he goes, no, I don't want to do this. I don't want to do us. I would like to, we're splitting up. I don't need your drama, was what I got. And so he booked us flights to come home 3 days early and had the gall to ask me for half the cost. And I was like, oh no, I'm not paying that. And then when we were on the plane and I was crying, he's like, what's wrong? And a lovely air hostess took pity on me and sat me away from him. And then we were all made redundant at our work a couple of months later. And because I didn't know any better at the time, we trauma bonded and got back together and dated for about 4.5 years. But we moved cities and worked together at that place too. So we kind of moved from one workplace into another because we both did the same thing. And yeah, it didn't end well.
What would you have done differently?
Yeah.
I think one of the main things that I would have done differently is had a little bit more confidence in myself, because a lot of the issues that we had in our relationship were from him subtly putting me down or making me feel like I couldn't do things or minimizing. I remember one time he came over to my side of the office because we worked in slightly different departments when we moved cities. And he was like, look at my girl working away, click, clack. And I was like, at the time I was like, oh, that's so cute. And now I'm like, that was really belittling. And he actually put me down in front of a whole bunch of my colleagues, my little girl working away. And I think that I just would have had a little bit more confidence in myself, because one of the issues that we did come up against is that when we moved cities, And when initially in the same workplace, I applied for other jobs and got them, and they were my dream jobs. And he was very dissatisfied at his workplace, and I was having a ball at mine. And it got to the point where there was this strange professional jealousy where if I came home and told him about the amazing stuff that I was doing, he would get cranky. And then so I stopped telling him, and then we had explosive arguments about, why are you trying to hide it from me? Why are you trying to keep your success from me? Like, what do you think? It's going to make me feel small? And I'm like, well, kind of, because that's how you've been acting.
Oh, this is so familiar to me. And this is where work and life collides. And so many of the issues are not actually work issues. No. They're human issues. They're issues about our self-worth. They're issues about how well we manage boundaries. I had a very, very similar scenario. I ended up marrying somebody that I was working in, and he ended up being my direct boss for a period of time. This was in the late 80s, early 90s, different world. And whilst I was more junior to him, everything was fine. But the minute I started earning more money than him and got transferred to another division and had more seniority, things fell apart.
That'll do it.
Things fell apart. And I have to be careful what I say, actually, because there's probably a lot of people that know me and know my first husband. Gorgeous guy, but didn't cope with my success. And then men like that often go into trying to control you. And if you don't have high levels of self-confidence and high levels of self-worth, which it takes time to build, and it's only when you go through these kind of, I'll call them traumas, because I subsequently divorced and I had my own trauma. I had a young child, a 3-year-old at the time. It's only until you process the trauma and get help and get lots of counseling that you start to build your own belief in yourself and your own value in yourself. It's like, hey, I'm actually good. I'm actually really good at this. And I deserve to be paid what I'm paid. And I deserve these promotions. But when you're in the midst of it and you're getting all this in your ears, really, really hard. Really hard.
Well, it's often too, if whether it's a partner or a friend, if they're not a cheerleader for your successes, and if they're not celebrating your successes, those are red flags. So, you saying going home and talking about things that you've done well, if they're not like going, that's really great. If they're cutting you off, that is a beginning of a red flag, because there's a jealousy there, or they're not building you up. They're pushing you down, and you want people who are building you up and celebrating your successes. And that's where it probably does make it really hard when you're having a relationship at work, because then you're also taking it home. And there's no
escaping. There is no escaping.
Exactly. And I was reading up on, I was reading something where it said that only 29% of relationships go longer than a year. That was one of the studies that we had. And in our poll that we just recently did, 28% people said they would have a relationship at work. 14% said if it was in another division, and 59% said no. But there were comments of people saying that they found their life partner. So it can happen, and I think it is very, very. It depends on, one, the type of environment. One, if you're in a position where you're wanting to move up the corporate ladder, and there's a high, because some positions aren't hierarchical. They're not like for instance, if you're a teacher, because remember, Elizabeth, because Elizabeth and I were on, what was it called again, Elizabeth? Insight. We were on the Insight program, for work and relationships, and there were lots of couples on there that you kind of go, I can kind of get why they would have a relationship. Somebody
they had very non-traditional workplaces, so they had like, I felt like such a Debbie Downer on that show, because there's all these happy couples, and they're like, and Elizabeth, and I'm like, oh, I broke up with someone and it was hell, and then we got back together and it was hell. But they had like teachers and they had actors and they had sports referees. There was one couple that were public servants, but
28 years ago.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
a completely different time and different world. So it was interesting to see that the people who had successful relationships were from fairly non-traditional, non-corporate workplaces.
Exactly. And then there was a couple that then ended up transferring after 3 months, which you kind of go, yeah, okay. If you are going to get a relationship with someone, one, you need to do it slowly, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe have some coffees and see if there's anything. You got to find out if it's acceptable in your organization. Then I think what would have really helped probably a lot of people, probably Elizabeth would have helped you and Krystyna, if you would have had people who you could have spoke to, like a mentor, someone who's gone through it, who you could have said, look, this is what's happening, and that would have maybe have helped.
Well, I sort of did find that I had one, but a little bit too late, because we had always planned when we moved cities that we were going to move home eventually. And so he ended up finding a job at home before I did, but I was still in the middle of my dream jobs. But I also was like, long distance is too hard. I just want to move home, because when you're in your late 20s, early 30s, you're just like, well, I have to move for my man, or, like it didn't seem as important as my feelings. But I remember one of my editors at the time, when I came to him and I said, look, I'm looking at moving to be with my partner. And he said, does he realize what you're giving up for him? Does he realize, like, you are so talented and you are so perfect to fit here? Does he realize that? And I was like, yeah, he does, whatever. No, he didn't at all. And I didn't at all either.
And I think you just hit the nail on the head. I think it's very common, and it's going to be a gross generalization here, very common for women when they find a partner that they really love and they believe they can have children with and have the happily ever after with, that we I'll speak for myself, we make decisions that compromise ourselves. And at the time, it's a little compromise. Mm-hmm. At the time, we kind of go, oh, my love for this person, and we've got a future, and I'm going to have babies. So, their career is important. And you make excuses and excuses and excuses. But what happens is those excuses build up and they build up, and those little compromises build up until you wake up one day and you go, where did Krystyna go? Where is Krystyna? I don't even know who Krystyna is anymore. Yeah.
And it took me probably about a year of therapy to figure out who I was, because by the
rest.
Because by the time I ended that relationship, I thought I was crap at mostly everything. I thought up was down, black was white, and I was trying to explain to somebody else how I could feel like that. And I was just like, it was just so many little things, but he would attack the things that I already thought that I was not very good at. Like he found the little parts of me that I was insecure about and told me that I was wrong about them. And so I would get more, and I'd be like, well, I already feel like I'm not good at this, so therefore I must not be good at this.
And you were with a narcissist.
Yeah. Whereas now I go, you know what, like, he's just found a chink in my armor, and I am good at this, and I have imposter syndrome, and everybody has imposter syndrome, but it does not mean that I'm not good at this.
Exactly.
Can I ask a question to both of you? Elizabeth, what age range were you in when that happened?
So 28 to 32, this relationship was.
28 to 32. And Krystyna?
Same age.
Same age. Okay.
Got married, 26 to 30. So, give or take, same age.
And the other person, Elizabeth, was there an age difference?
He was 8 years older.
6 years older.
6 years older. Okay, so there was that, I know everything, and you're just a kid growing. You're a lot younger than me. So
well, At the start of our relationship, he did actually call me kid when I was at work. He's like, hey, kid, like, how you doing? Blah, blah, blah. And I was like, ha, 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 so cute. And now I'm like, that's not right.
Yeah, I wonder, that wouldn't happen today, would it?
No, I was like the little girl. I was, young and innocent to him. And he would be like, look at my little girl, blah, blah, blah. And now I'm just like, oh, gross.
It's cringy.
Yeah.
It's cringy now when you think of it. You go, oh my God, somebody said that.
Yeah.
I think the world has changed. My scenario was in the late 80s, early 90s. That's a lifetime ago in terms of where we've come culturally.
Mine was even 10 years ago, and we've come
the Me Too movement, and everybody finding their voice, and HR finding their voice, and people finding their voice, and everything that comes with that, good and bad, because there's been bad that's come with that too. It's changed. I mean, we all used to date people at work. It was how you met people. It's how you met your partners, how you met your husbands. But I think if I was in corporate now, I'd be thinking really, really hard about the consequences of doing that, because the consequences are not trivial. In those days, it was just what happened.
Yeah.
Like, it was just the way you met people. But it's so different now.
It was contained. So, and then also too, depending on when, like for instance, when I was going to uni, I worked in retail. And so the guys that were at the store that we worked at, well, I dated, that was fun. We all went out, and because I wasn't going to work in retail, I had no idea that was my, means to an end, basically. And so that was all kind of fun during that time. But even then, even in that environment where everybody knows everybody, it was contained. Like if there was a breakup or whatever, it was contained with that group. It didn't go out on social media or to other divisions or other areas as gossip that was going to be there forever. And that is what is so hard, I think, for people who are having relationships now, especially at work, is that if it doesn't work, everybody knows about it probably throughout the whole organization. They're all going to have their view, and they're all going to, there's going to be the, people on this person's side and people on that person's side, that kind of thing. And that's really damaging from a career point of view. And is it worth it? I was reading up on the internet just a little while ago, that some of the ones that seeing what the legal sites would say. And I had to laugh, because this one said, what you should do is you should make sure that you have an agreement while, at the beginning of the relationship, about an exit, kind of like an exit, like a
prenup for working together.
Prenup for work. What happens if the relationship goes wrong? This is what, and I just laughed. I thought, who in the hell is going to do that? No one is going to do that.
But you know what? When people are going through trauma, when people are going through grief, when people feel jilted, or when they feel poorly done by, because we're all human, you actually don't know how someone's going to respond. And you think you're with somebody who's rational and mature, and you've had this, breakup that you both agreed on. But then later somebody starts going through a grief process, and they start getting angry, and they might do something crazy and lash out or say something that they shouldn't, and then it can all come falling apart so quickly.
So here's the kicker: when they see you start dating someone else, then that could start its own little problems, of people being the breakup. You really have to think these things through now to conclusion, almost worst case scenario. Going, okay, he's just asked me, or she's just asked me out. And start thinking, worst case scenario, do I really like this person that much?
With those agreements, I've had a little bit of experience with different agreements like that, and they're not legally binding. They basically can give a court an idea of what your intentions were, but in the end, that's only if you go to court. There's nothing about that agreement that is legally binding.
Yeah, exactly. And who, let's just say you're looking at this agreement, and the agreement says, okay, because I'm in the more senior position, that means that I'll stay here, but you need to go. And
Like,
then,
like, okay, I'll leave. Bye.
Yeah, like that's going to happen.
oh,
Like,
I like
I
my
just don't
job.
think we're dealing with a pragmatic approach. It's just not going to.
No.
Humans are more complex than that.
Yeah.
And
So
time.
is it ever okay? Is it ever okay? Like what situations would warrant it okay? If you were in the corporate life today and you were and that presented that with, is there ever a situation where you think, yeah, I'm going to risk it?
Honestly, as much as I say absolutely not, I would never. If I felt it again, I probably would. But I would be more careful about it, about how I navigated it, about evaluating my career against a relationship rather than being like, well, I'm nearing 30 and that means I need to start considering my future and settling down and getting married. So therefore, stuff my career. I'm just going to do this and my career will get back on track later. I think I'd weight my career a lot more, a lot heavier if I did it again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think
too,
and
what
you've got
about
the benefit
like
of knowledge, you've got
money?
the benefit of the experience, and you've got the benefit of having a greater belief in yourself and a trust and a value of yourself. And I think the hard part is when you go into this at that time, often we don't have that belief in ourselves. And
Do
that
you think that people who haven't gone through what you and I have gone through have that strong, like, do you have to have gone through someone putting you down to find yourself again?
No, I don't believe that's the case. It was just my journey. It was
Yeah.
just my Achilles heel. It
Just
was
hear this so often on our podcast is that people don't realize their true value until somebody else has put it down. And only it seems to me, I keep getting all these stories on our podcast about all the, it's the narcissists that believe in themselves and everybody else who has to go through the trauma of someone else putting them down before they realize they're wrong.
Well, the narcissists are still going through trauma. It's just how they deal with their trauma.
Well, I think what happens too is people get angry if someone like puts them down and challenges their abilities. And so it's someone who is, they're probably humble and they're, like I always call the silent achievers. And then they get someone who actually says something to them. And then they finally get the courage or say something. No, I'm not taking that. That's not true. But they might let them knock them down one or two times before they get angry. Because you kind of almost have to go, now that's it. I'm not taking this anymore. They've hit, they've gone too far.
I think some of it comes with maturity. I think the more mature we get, the more experienced we get, the more comfortable we are managing our boundaries and holding our boundaries. So somebody might say something to us once and we kind of brush it off, and they might say something to us again and we brush it off. And the third time around, we'll go, actually, not okay. And we'll actually, whereas when we're not so practiced at managing our boundaries, we let it go for way, way too long until we've lost ourselves or we've compromised ourselves to such a degree that it's like, well, like I said earlier, where's Krystyna?
Yeah, I remember there was one specific thing that I remember that he said to me is when I was up visiting family in the city that I was going to move back to. And we were in a group of friends and we were just talking about what we were doing. And this guy said, well, I'm obviously going to have to go back and help Liz move because she's incapable of doing it by herself. And I didn't say anything. I just went, oh, okay. But inside I was furious because I'd moved house several times without him in my life, without anybody helping me. But at the time I'd had 3 or 4 years of basically those tiny little put downs. So when the big smash came and he said something to me in front of my friends, I didn't say anything about it because I was so far away from where I started.
Yeah. And unfortunately that happens, and it happens to talented, successful, achieving women. Because often I'll speak for myself, I was in my early career, I was a bit of a superstar. I had a fast track, I was earning good money, I was doing really well, I was really well regarded, but I didn't have a lot of confidence around my ability to be loved and have a relationship. That was my Achilles heel. but I was damn good at my job and really well regarded. And that was just that was my weakness. That was my weakness. So it happens to very successful women.
Well, that in itself is probably another good reason not to have relationships with people you work directly with them or avoid them at all costs, because then you don't have that emotional part that that intertwines with day and home, so that you're not going into work and then you're working together and then someone's doing that. Where if that wouldn't have been your partner and they said that to you, my guess is you probably would have gone, what the hell are you talking about? Right?
Exactly. Like if someone said that to me in a work context and they weren't someone that I was in a relationship with, I would lose it. Yes. Can you imagine if someone said that in front of colleagues? Well, you're not capable of doing that by yourself, so I guess I'll do it. Like, no, thank you. And yet somehow you take it in your home life.
Yeah, exactly. Because you don't want to cause issues, or you don't want confrontation, because you're not going to say anything there because that's going to cause confrontation. People are going to go, oh, they're fighting. And then, you might have to take it home. But then you get home and you think, oh, I don't want, because a lot of people don't like confrontation. So they let things slide, but it still goes in the memory bank. It starts building up, and then all of a sudden, that's when the volcano blows. It gets to a certain point where you go, no, I'm not taking it anymore. But, I guess the lesson learned through these things are, yeah, we've learned that lesson, but it did make you stronger. And it does make you wiser. And you think, okay, if I was ever in that situation again, I'm going to do it differently. And
well, half the reason I got into doing my podcast, honestly, is because I wanted to tell stories. Like I started as a relationship columnist for She Said, and I got people writing into me saying that the story that you told about your life and your experiences really helped me. And that's the whole reason I wanted to go into podcasting about relationships, is because I want to tell people stories that have someone at home going, I'm experiencing that. What can I take away from this? And
I think there are a lot of people that are experiencing the things that we're talking about that don't want to talk about it because there's a bit of embarrassment about it. There's a bit of shame about it. I mean, who likes to admit that they're vulnerable, or that they haven't managed their boundaries, or that they feel unlovable, or that they've let something get away from them in the way that you and I let things get away from us? You don't want to admit that.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So that's the great thing about your podcast and podcasts like these, is that we didn't have any of this stuff back in our days, right?
Back in our day.
In our days, in the olden days, we had the wagon. But the thing is that this is great because people can listen to these and actually listen to real life situations that aren't manufactured, that are, people have gone through it, and then see other people made mistakes, other people got through it. It wasn't the end of the world. They learned from it. They're better off now, those kind of things. And I guess from an audience point of view, if people are listening to us now, and they're thinking about getting into a relationship at work, as we pretty much almost said, just don't do it, run the other way. But if you are going to get into a relationship at work, then there's probably some practical things that you should do as you're entering into this relationship. So let's just quickly go around and talk about what it is. Krystyna, maybe 2 things that you would do. Elizabeth, 2 things, and then we'll go into our part 2. What would you suggest people do if they're going into a relationship with someone at work? Krystyna.
On me? Oh, wow. What would I do now? I think you need to be open and transparent with the people around. Like, you need to go and have a conversation with HR. I think it depends on the seniority of each of the people in the relationship and whether they're directly working with each other, for each other, or in the same department. I think if you're in a completely different division, if it's an organization with 20,000 people and it's a completely different division, I don't think there are the same kind of issues. but there are much bigger issues if you are in the same team, if your colleagues in the same team, if you're directly reporting or can influence somebody's career. It just, because when in the moment, your heart takes over, right?
It absolutely does. It absolutely does. And I can sit here and say I would never do it again, but I know that if I felt those same feelings, I probably would do it again. I think one of the things that I would do is, as I said earlier, weight my career a little bit more heavily in my thoughts. So I would potentially say, you know, yes, we can date, but if it starts affecting work, then no, kind of thing. I think I would have a lot more serious thoughts about the impact that it would have. If it was a job that I didn't care about, I probably wouldn't think much of it. But at the time, like, I really cared about the job that I gave up to move home to be with him. I really did. So I
kind of look back as well, and I gave up a job to move interstate to follow what became my husband's career. And I kind of look back now and I go, well, I actually had an experience I wouldn't have otherwise had.
Yeah.
And whilst it was difficult and I took a bit of a backward step in my career, it actually in many ways rounded out my career. So on the one hand, like, you kind of say, well, I'm not going to take a backward step and I'm going to weight my career higher. But then sometimes the way the universe kind of throws things at you, they give you a whole other set of experiences that you wouldn't have otherwise had, that then take you on the next step of your journey, that allow you to be an amazing relationship podcaster that you wouldn't have otherwise had if you hadn't had that bad experience.
My problem was that I followed him for his job and ended up in the job of my dreams. And then instead of listening to the universe, I followed him home instead of staying in the dream career. So I mean, that dream career did open a lot of extra doors for me at the time when I came home. I kind of had a little bit more to pick from. But yeah, gosh, the universe tried to tell me something and I ignored it twice.
And I think that's the message. I think that's the message. The message is listen to your inner voice.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly right. And I mean, look, every disaster I've ever had in my life resulted in something better. When I look back and I go, if that wouldn't have happened, I wouldn't have had, this wouldn't have happened. If that wouldn't happen, that wouldn't have happened. And it always ended up in a better place. At the time, you know, you're like devastated and miserable and you can't believe it's happened to you. But then you look back and you go, oh yeah, that maybe was the universe talking to you. The universe might have been saying to you, don't go back, because there's going to be a little bit of pain for a lot of gain.
Exactly. It was one of those things where my gut told me to not go, but I still went, which
going down that track, which might have been the silver lining that took you somewhere else.
It
so
did.
It's hard to know. It's the sliding doors, isn't it?
Made this whole podcasting journey that I've had happen, you know, and it's probably been one of the best.
It was a gift.
Yeah.
It was a gift.
Yeah.
He
gave me anything, but in this case, the experience gave me
great material. It's good material.
We're crap at giving advice, Judith. I'm sorry. On this issue, we're crap at giving advice because I think we can intellectualize advice and we can process advice, but the heart is the heart and the heart does what the heart does.
And look, the main thing is that if you're going to go down that track, there are a couple practical things that you do need to do when you're working in an organization. One is find out what the rules of engagement are with your current organization, because some companies do have rules for people not dating at work. So find out what those rules of engagement are. And it may be you need to let HR know, or you need to let your boss know, and let them know that you're in a relationship. Once you've decided that you are definitely in a relationship, don't bring the relationship to work. When you're at work, you're working. It's professional. You don't call your pet name, do those things. And, you know, don't make it obvious from that point. Don't go to lunch for 2 hours together, those kind of things. Keep it professional. And then if for some reason there is an opportunity, I would personally, my personal advice, if you're in the same division, and start looking to transfer out into another division if you can, if it's gotten to that point. And that would have to be with a discussion, because it could hinder your advancement as well. And then if you do get promoted, let's say your partner is the boss and they do promote you, well, then people, that's the reason you got promoted, even if it's happening either. So just look at it logically from the point of view, okay, we're in a relationship, it's going good, you're going to be my life partner, we're happy, but it's a large organization. Should we actually, or do we actually want to be in the same division, working with each other day to day, and then go home?
So Judith, I think that's a really good segue. I think that's a really good segue to, it seemed like a good idea at the time. So everybody, that's the end of part 1. Please stay tuned to part 2, where we go through some Q&A and work through some real life examples. For more information about Every Step and our guests, head to everysteppodcast.com. To be notified of new podcasts, please subscribe via your favourite listening platform. And of course, follow us on social media and direct message us to share your ideas about guests or topics.